We'll leave the last minute of this conversation to go live now as the British House of Commons is holding a hearing here in Washington, D.C., focused on so-called fake news. It's scheduled to last until about 3 Eastern.
And we are thrilled to be here and absolutely delighted with the support and welcome we've received from George Washington University, and grateful for their efforts in helping us put on these hearings here. This is the first time a Select Committee has taken live evidence in this way outside of the United Kingdom, and so I'm grateful for everyone's work who's made the logistics behind that possible. And I'd like to thank the witnesses from the different companies we'll see today for their evidence too. Just as one sort of small piece of housekeeping at the start, and for people who are unfamiliar with the work of House of Commons Select Committees, but maybe more familiar with the work of congressional committees, it's understood that anyone taking part in a proceeding of Parliament like this answers questions honestly and truthfully to the committee, and it's an offence to mislead Parliament. I'm not suggesting for any moment our witnesses would do that, but we don't require witnesses to swear an oath in front of the committee because in our rules it's implied that they will be telling the truth, so we don't need to see an oath being sworn to affirm that. We'll also we have a number of sessions to get through today, and I'm conscious that we need to do that in good time and in good order. I'd like to ask the members of the committee to be clear in directing their questions either to individual members of the panel and be clear what they're asking for as well. And just to say to the witnesses too, because of the time constraints, I would be grateful if witnesses would answer the questions put to them and avoid, as far as possible, being drawn into general statements of policy. And if a question is directed to you personally, that you be the person that answers that. And if we can do that, hopefully we'll keep to some sort of time. I would like to start the questioning, and Mr. Greengrass, to ask you, do you regard, and does Google regard, campaigns of disinformation and fake news as being harmful to your customers?
First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Collins, for the opportunity to be here and address the committee and present evidence. I would think there's no question that the issue of misinformation and untoward influence on our societies is indeed an issue, and is certainly an issue for Google. I should point out that, as you know, our mission is to organize the world's information and make it accessible and make it useful. Billions of users take advantage of our services every day and rely on us to do the right thing, rely on us to provide the right information. So this is not only important to us as a company and important to our users, important to society, it's actually crucial to what we do. I often think of ourselves as being in the trust business. We will continue to retain the loyal usage of people around the world to the extent that we retain their trust with our work every day. So I agree it's an important issue, a significant issue, and we'll continue our efforts to make sure that throughout what we do on Google Search or Google News is make sure that we're surfacing the best information from the best possible sources and doing our best to make sure that trustworthy information does not surface.
Thank you. I think we'd all agree we'd certainly agree it's important, and I'm glad that you think it's important too. But I asked you whether you thought it was harmful, whether disinformation can be harmful to society and to your customers that may be innocent recipients of it.
Without question, it can be harmful. And I think of misinformation in a broad range of areas, not just in news and politics. As I note, people come to Google every day, for instance, looking for medical information. It's not hard in the medical area if you're, concerned about health, and you might say, do peach pits cure cancer? You can go to Google, and indeed you might find information that suggests that. So even, across our surfaces as we look at content is how do we make sure that they have the right information that is helpful and not harmful to them.
Do you believe that, as you say, if disinformation is harmful to society and to individuals, what responsibility do you think the companies like yours, like the other tech companies we'll hear evidence from today, what sense do you think you have a responsibility to protect your customers from being unwittingly exposed to harmful disinformation?
We feel an extraordinary sense of responsibility. As I was noting, the loyalty to our users is based on their continued trust in us. To the extent that they don't trust us, they'll stop using our products and our business will collapse. So from that perspective alone, it's crucial to us. But it goes beyond that. believe strongly in having an effective democracy. We believe strongly in having both supporting free expression and supporting a sustainable, high-quality journalism ecosystem to make sure that quality information is out there, to make sure that our citizens, not just our customers, have the knowledge and information they need to be good citizens.
Juniper Downs, there's been research done looking at the role that the Next Up feature on YouTube plays in supplying fake news, fake information to users through recommendation. What steps are you taking to address that problem?
Yes, thank you, and thank you to the committee. Good morning, everyone. I'm Juniper Downs, and I'm the Global Director of Public Policy and Government Relations for YouTube. Our recommendation engine was designed to give users the kinds of content they want to see, and it actually works quite well in the main use cases of YouTube. Educational content, comedy, music, providing users with more of the kinds of content they want to see is quite useful in those genres. News content makes up a fairly small percentage of YouTube's overall watch time, less than 2%. And we recognize that there's work to do on our recommendation engine in terms of making sure we're surfacing the right news content to our users. We've been investing a lot of resources in making sure we surface authoritative news sources and demote low-quality content. But as some of the press coverage has shown over the past week, we still have work to do. There's progress to be made, and we recognize that and take responsibility for it.
YouTube has supplied the Senate Intelligence Committee with information related to 18 YouTube channels that were linked to backed by the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, which accounts for, I think, 1,100 videos and 43 hours of content. Could you just confirm, was the identification of those channels based on analysis conducted by the Intelligence Committee itself, based on information it had received, or is that YouTube's own research looking for channels like this?
So the security and integrity of our products is core to our business model. We cooperated with the congressional investigation into whether there was any interference in the U.S. election, and the channels that we discovered on YouTube that were connected to the Internet Research Agency were due to a thorough investigation that we conducted using our own resources. We have publicly reported that information to Congress through the Intelligence Committee, where our general counsel testified back in the fall.
So the identification of those accounts is based on your own research and not intelligence or information you were given?
Our research and our investigation included leads and intelligence provided to us by others, including other companies who are conducting similar investigations.
Included, but what did you do yourself? That wasn't based on leads, but just based on your ability to analyze how people are using the platform?
Correct. So we looked at the leads we were provided and went far beyond that in looking at any advertisements that had a connection to Russia. We looked also at organic content to see if there were channels on YouTube that were connected to the Internet Research Agency that weren't purchasing advertising but were simply uploading content.
You may be aware that the committee has written to Twitter and Facebook asking for its analysis of whether Russian-backed agencies were involved in interfering with elections in the UK, particularly the Brexit referendum and our recent general election. Would YouTube be, Facebook are conducting that research for us. I hope we'll get an update from Twitter later. I don't really know what they're doing about it. But would YouTube be prepared to conduct the same analysis that you've conducted in the United States for the UK, looking at potential Russian interference in and around the Brexit referendum and other elections?
Absolutely. We're happy to cooperate with the UK government's investigation into whether there was any interference in elections in the UK. We have conducted a thorough investigation around the Brexit referendum and found no evidence of interference. Again, we looked at all advertisements with any connection to Russia, and we found no evidence of our services being used to interfere in the Brexit referendum, and we're happy to cooperate with any further efforts.
Yes, obviously that's the Electoral Commission's investigation, which is agency of the government. I'm asking about this committee's investigation, and we're not just looking necessarily for paid-for advertising linked to the election, but actually the operation of channels or the uploading of films which can be linked back to Russian agencies and had a political purpose or message during the referendum. Would you be able to do that for us?
We are happy to cooperate with that investigation.
So that's a yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. If I could just bring in at this point Jo Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to ask about the search function on Google. So you may be aware of a British journalist, Carol Cadwallader, who we met some members of your company earlier this week. And she was talking about the autofill search or auto-finish search. So she conducted a simple exercise. When she typed Jew into the search function, it would auto-finish the rest of the search for her. And all of it came up with far-right, extremist, anti-Semitic searches. Now, I'm interested to know, why did it take a UK journalist doing such a simple exercise? Why was she able to identify this issue? Why hadn't Google identified it previously?
I thank you for that question. These occurrences happen from time to time. Many we catch ourselves, others we do not. The autocomplete feature on Google Search is an important service to our users, right? You come to search, you begin to enter a query, and we offer suggestions based on what other users have searched for. It's a dynamic feature. Everything we work on in terms of the corpus of expression of the web or the corpus of queries that people ask is a live and vibrant corpus, changes every day. And are indeed also malicious actors out there who will indeed seek to game this as well. So as we have constructed these, we continue to build defenses to this, and also to build mechanisms such that users inside or outside the company have the agency to identify these things and mention and bring them to our attention so that we can quickly correct them. And that's what we look to do. Clearly, those kinds of terms that you might see in those are offensive to all of us, egregiously offensive, and we'll look to take care of them. Again, it goes back to the trust of our users.
And your algorithms, so your algorithms are developed, and the data that the algorithms gather, it's a cyclical thing, isn't it? So,
yes.
You know, that determines then what phrases are picked up. So what safeguards are you putting in place? Can you give us some examples to prevent that cyclical enhancement of hate content if people are searching using those terms?
Well, it's the continuous advance of our own systems in terms of what kinds of terms to look for, what kinds of strings of words to look for, and make sure that they don't occur. It's also maintaining constant efforts on our part to evaluate the results we serve. We have a large team of what we call raters, 10,000 people around the globe who are constantly at work assessing our results against different queries. Are we surfacing the right kind of results? Are we surfacing results that have appropriate authority? And we use those hundreds of thousands of bits of data from those evaluations to continue to train our systems. This is an ongoing effort. As much as I would like to believe that our algorithms can be perfect, I don't expect they ever will be, simply because of the dynamics of the ecosystem upon which we work. But we will continue to strive to make sure that situations like that occur as infrequently as possible.
And my final question on developers and algorithms. Do you have an ethics policy that your developers work within, or a framework, or would developers' inherent biases, because we all have inherent biases, influence the algorithm that they build?
Absolutely. That's crucial. There are ethics policies that guide our work. Those raters, specifically, we have a 160-page a set of rater guidelines, which is public information. It's available for anyone here to look at, that guides their assessments. So we work on top of policy. We constantly evolve that policy. We constantly train those who have to apply those policies to make sure we're doing the right thing.
Can I just clarify so I'm clear? Your raiders, as you call them, are they developers?
They're not necessarily developers.
Right, so you're developers that build the algorithms, that develop the algorithms.
That too.
Do they have an ethics policy?
Yes, internally we have ethics policies. For instance, we have an internal policy called the Honest Results Policy, which prevents our engineering teams and people like me from trying to influence the algorithms in untoward ways or allow third parties to influence our algorithms in inappropriate ways.
Okay, thank you.
Ian Lucas.
I was very struck by your statement that you're in the trust business. Trust is really based on knowledge. Do you believe your customers know what information you retain about them and how you use it?
I would hope so. We have made great efforts to provide transparency and control to our users about the information that we collect as they use our services. And we collect that information to make the services better to them. But they can come to a control panel, and millions and hundreds of millions people have, to look at what information we're collecting, and for that matter to change the settings. They can tell us to not collect certain kinds of information. That's always there for them. It's hugely important that we maintain, in a sense, a dialogue with our users about the information that we do collect from them to provide better services to them. I will also point out that we never share that information with third parties, never have, never will. It's crucially important that we protect that. Again, it's part of the trust relationship that's important that we maintain with our users.
So you will give me all of the information that you hold about me? If I
Indeed,
ask for it?
you can come to Google and look at the information that we have about you in our different services.
And will you tell me how you use that information? I mean, for example, I'm a politician. Would you tell me how I could use that information for political purposes?
Well, we don't use any information for political purposes, but we do try to be as transparent as we can about how we use that information. I'll give you an example. Google Search. Google Search is not personalized, except that we will tune the results based on where you are, geography. If you're looking for a restaurant in London, then we'll surface restaurants in London. But otherwise, we think it's important not to personalize search results. We expect that what you want to see and find is any information that's out there in the corpus of expression, without us trying to guide you in one way or another based on what we think you might be interested in.
Do you market your capabilities to politicians?
We market various services, for instance, our ads, to various folks who want to advertise using our products, and to some degree that does use data to help target information.
Do you have a specific team who market advertising to politicians?
I'm not that familiar with our sales organization selling ads to know how we approach these things. We have advertising sales teams in countries around the world. I imagine some focus on different categories, but it's not an area of my expertise in my role as Vice President of News.
Is it within your area of expertise, Ms. Downs?
I want to reiterate some of what Richard said about how we use the information we collect from users. So the main principles of privacy at Google are transparency and control. And for YouTube, for example, we do collect the watch history of signed-in users, but the user can at any time pause or delete that watch history. And the way we use that information is to improve the service for users. So earlier we were talking about recommendations. If we know that someone is a lover of comedy or of a particular kind of music, we can use that watch history to optimize the service. We never sell the information to advertisers. We do provide aggregate data to advertisers to help them optimize their campaigns. So in terms of the work our sales team does with various constituents who are interested in using Google's ad products, that's the kind of information that would be provided, never information about individual users.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just on that point, Juniper Downs, if you can provide such precise aggregate data, why do you find it so difficult to identify bad content on the platform? Why do you still have problems of fake news being filtered in next up?
Identifying and managing content on YouTube is the #1 priority for us this year. It's mission critical for the business. It's critical to our users, to our creators, to our advertisers, and to us as a company. And so we invest tremendous resources, both in terms of technology and the people working on these issues. Our executive team is absolutely engaged. We meet hours every week to figure out how we can improve our systems to make sure that the policies on YouTube are followed, that we are quickly identifying content that violates those policies and removing it. So this is a top priority for the business.
What sort of percentage of your advertising revenue do you reinvest in the site in this way?
I don't have an exact percentage, but we have spent tens of millions of dollars fighting spam and abuse across our products, and we've committed to having 10,000 people across Google by the end of this year who are working on these issues.
Tens of millions of dollars?
Tens of millions.
What's the annual advertising revenue for YouTube?
I'm sorry that I don't know the answer to that question.
Just roughly, you must have a rough idea.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question, but I just want to reiterate that we will invest the necessary resources to address these issues, not only in terms of the people that we employ, but the technology that we develop. We are continually staffing up, and we have seen good progress in our management of these issues. For example, over the past 8 months, the work that we've done on violent extremism, I think, it speaks for itself in that not only have we removed over 100,000 videos, but the speed with which we've been able to identify this content and remove it from the site has gotten faster and faster, where we're now at the point of 70% of that content being removed within 8 hours of upload and 50% within 2 hours of upload. That's the kind of progress that we demand of ourselves and that we will continue to strive for across all of these issues as we move forward.
So we'll see if we can see if we can work out during the course of the morning what that percentage is. My suspicion is it might be quite small, but I think many people will still say though that you can sell the service. That's how you make your money, selling the service to micro-target people, that the same tools must be capable to use the same tools to more effectively identify harmful content. Of the content you do take down, though, how much of that is, what sort of proportion of that is user referral of bad content, and how much of it is bad content you discover for yourselves?
So the technology that we've developed to identify content that may violate our policies is doing more and more of the heavy lifting for us. So in the area of violent extremism, we're now at 98% of the content we have removed for violent extremism has been identified by our algorithms. That number varies from policy to policy, depending on how effective and precise the technology is on particular issues. When it comes to misleading and deceptive content, our spam detection systems are quite effective at identifying the behavioral patterns associated with mass-produced misinformation that is being distributed through our services. In 2017, we removed over 130,000 videos for violating our misleading spam policy. Those were virtually all identified by our technology.
Do you, if you had evidence of someone who was being heavily exposed to or distributing violent extremist content, or maybe other forms of extreme content that might be a danger to children, do you identify what sort of responsibility do you think you might have to share that knowledge with law enforcement agencies, people that might actually want to take a more active interest in the people who are doing this or that person?
So we cooperate and meet regularly with law enforcement to share information. When it comes to the disclosure of user data, obviously we do that pursuant to valid legal process. There are mechanisms in place where law enforcement can request information from us pursuant to their investigations. There are also emergency disclosure provisions where if we identify content on our services that poses an immediate risk to life, we disclose that information proactively. When it comes to the safety of children, we obviously report to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children any solicitation of minors or content that's exploitative in that way. They then, in turn, cooperate with law enforcement internationally to make sure that those instances are followed up with.
Sure, I appreciate that. I appreciate you will cooperate with authorities upon request, but someone might say if someone had a family member that was a victim of a violent act, and actually from their interests and on YouTube, the things they take an interest in, maybe channels they set up, it was quite clear this was potentially someone who's quite violent and dangerous. Some people might say, well, have you not got a responsibility to notify the authorities of people that give you cause for concern, not just wait to cooperate with an investigation after a crime's been committed?
Certainly, if we identify someone on our services who is posing that kind of threat to individuals, and we do see these instances where maybe someone is threatening to perpetuate a violent attack, we would proactively disclose that because we would consider that part of the emergency disclosure provisions.
Thank you. Rebecca Pound.
Thank you very much. It's along those same lines. I wanted to look really at the ethics of Google and look at your up next button and actually your scoring system that you have for videos. Would it be right to say that usually the videos or the content that has the highest score is something that's had the most views? So the quantity, would you say, or something? So hits are important to Juniper Downs.
Thank you for the question. So the recommendation engine is quite complex, and it varies depending on the video that's being watched. One of the factors is content that is popular on YouTube. There's also content that is associated. So if I have a real niche interest, I'm interested in a particular kind of knitting, there may not be a lot of highly popular videos that are about that type of knitting, but we will continue to recommend videos that are similar and that provide more instruction on that type of knitting. So popularity.
Popularly usually means lots of hits, doesn't it? And I just wanted to mention some research that was done recently by The Guardian that suggested that the largest source of news for false news channels came from YouTube and came from these videos that tend to be recommended by the up next button, and more research by Oxford academics demonstrated a lot of this had a far right bias. So I put it to you that if that is the case, you are indoctrinating society.
So I'm not here to comment on the particular methodology of the Guardian research, but I will say that when it comes to recommendations, we recognize that we have more work to do. Recommendations are largely a reflection of user interest. When it comes to news content, our goal is to promote more authoritative sources and to demote lower quality content from less established sources. So it's not only popularity that fuels the recommendation engine, it's also trying to draw from sources that are well-established, known sources of news and put that near the top. Do we succeed every time? We don't. I'll give you a recent example where earlier this week, obviously, the stock market fell, and our algorithms recognized stock market plunge as being a newsy query because a lot of established news sources were using the word plunge in their coverage, but didn't recognize stock market crash because for some reason that term wasn't being used. That was flagged to us. Of course, we immediately corrected it and made sure that we were surfacing authoritative sources across both of those queries. But even those subtleties in language can cause our systems to misfire on occasion, and we work quickly to try to correct that.
But I put it to you, the Guardian information fed 8,000 YouTube recommendations into their system, their software system, and which tracks political disinformation campaigns. And in every case, the largest source of traffic for these fake news channels came from YouTube's up next algorithm. So you're clearly saying that you don't agree with that.
I'm saying it's an area of progress for us. So that research was done in the lead up to the election. I think we've made a lot of progress since in making sure that the more authoritative sources surface near the top of our recommendation engine. It's an area that we will continue to work on and improve. We recognize that some of those results are not where we want to be as a product, and so it's an area of investment for us.
There's just one other area I wanted to touch on, which is this point that it seems like in choosing to rank videos and to have a system of what's good and what's better and what's higher and what's lower, you are in fact acting as an editor, which is what an editor of a newspaper would do, and yet you are not calling yourselves editors, you're calling yourselves hosts. And I wonder whether you might think that your the description of what you are ought to be changed, and that your whole name for your platform ought to be changed so that you take on more of the responsibilities as would a bona fide newspaper, so that you would have to apply broadcast and newspaper regulations to yourself, because at the moment you are unregulated.
So when it comes to the scale of our services, we have well over 400 hours of content uploaded by creators to YouTube every minute. There has to be some organizing principle by which we determine when someone comes to YouTube, searches for funny videos, there has to be an algorithm that delivers the most relevant and useful results to that individual user. So that's how our algorithms function. I think the question of whether we're a publisher really gets to the question of, do we take responsibility for the content on our site? And the answer to that question is absolutely yes. This is a top priority for us to make sure that we're providing a useful service to our users and that we are exercising responsibility.
But you are self-policing, aren't you?
We have a set of community...
And is that right?
We have a set of community guidelines that set the rules of the road for YouTube. Those have been in place for since we acquired YouTube as a service. They're dynamic. They evolve in response to changing trends in the world and changing trends in what kinds of content and misuse of our services we see. We've developed those guidelines because we're trying to maintain a certain kind of community for our users. They do go above and beyond what the law requires, but we also follow the law in the jurisdictions where we're launched. So when we are alerted to content that may violate a particular law, we also block that content for the relevant jurisdiction. I think the model of self-regulation that I've just described, if you look at the EU Internet Forum, where we've been cooperating with the European Commission for several years now on the removal of illegal hate speech from our services, is a good model of how governments, NGOs, and the tech industry can collaborate to ensure that we are acting responsibly and quickly to deal with these content issues. And the Commission has acknowledged the progress of that process.
It's strange that you're described as the most overlooked story of 2016, and people are describing this whole social media issue as a disease on society and affecting behaviour. It's surprising that you don't seem to register any of that.
We take the criticism there very seriously. This, again, is a top priority for the company to make sure that we continue to invest in detecting content that may violate our policies, that we are watching for bad actors who are trying to manipulate or exploit our systems. The openness of YouTube has brought tremendous benefits to society when it comes to educational content, culture, music, the arts. Those benefits are tremendous. And of course, that openness also presents challenges. And those challenges are ones that we are committed to managing and dealing with responsibly.
Thank you. I think we've been the committee clerk's been busy trying to work out the answer to the question about how much money YouTube makes. I think some independent market analysis, I appreciate the figure is not disclosed by the company, estimates that YouTube's global revenues are about $10 billion US dollars. That sound about right?
I really can't confirm any of those numbers. It's not information that I have access to.
Okay. Well, just say if it was, and just for easy maths, if that was, if you're investing $10 million a year in making YouTube safer, and the revenues are $10 billion, then you're reinvesting 0.1% back in making the site safer. If that's true, that would to me sounds like a small sticking plaster over a gaping wound, and not likely to be satisfactory in addressing some of the concerns that Rebecca Power has raised. I don't know if you want to comment on those figures, but if you can't today, I appreciate the company may not want to disclose figures in terms of revenue, but if they could give us a percentage figure for the amount that's reinvested back in the site as a proportion of revenues from YouTube, we'd be very grateful for that. But I say, based on publicly available figures, that 0.1% seems to be where they come out.
I think your question gets to, are we investing adequate resources in addressing these issues? And I will say there really is no constraint on the resources that we will put toward getting this right. We have invested tremendous time from our engineering teams, from our executive teams, from the trust and safety operation, which has nearly doubled in size over the past year. So we take these issues very seriously, and if we decide that we are unable to make our desired progress because we don't have adequate investment in the issue, we will invest more in addressing it.
Well, all I'd say is that if for a multi-billion-dollar business, if tens of millions of dollars is the investment to address these widely held concerns that are increasingly being well documented, that sounds like a pretty unambitious program of investment. And I think understandably, given the huge size of the platform, people would question whether that sort of investment is ever likely to be successful in addressing some of these concerns. But I want to bring in Chris Matheson.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Downs, I just want to follow on from Mr Power's questions about the Paul Lewis article on The Guardian. And it quotes Guillaume Chasleau, one of your former engineers, who says that watch time was the priority that your algorithms give to prioritising what comes up next, not necessarily truthfulness or decency or honesty. How would you comment on that allegation?
So watch time is obviously an important metric for us because it demonstrates that we're providing a service that users love, where they want to spend time on the product, that they're enjoying and find the experience of YouTube valuable. For certain kinds of content, watch time for music, for example. I know I listen to hours of music on YouTube because it keeps delivering the music I want to hear. We know that for news and for certain other verticals, the veracity of the content that we provide to our users is also incredibly important, which is why some of the changes we've made over the past years have been about making sure we are surfacing more authoritative content to users where they're getting the information they're seeking, demoting lower quality content. We've created dedicated news surfaces. We have a new breaking news shelf, so when there's a breaking news event, we surface high quality content near the top, and then the recommendations are also limited to those authoritative sources. We also invest in making sure that the users of YouTube have the skills they need to assess the content they're watching. So in the UK, we created a campaign called Internet Citizens, where we're committed to training 20,000 young people in identifying fake news and learning how to check their sources and bias and so on. So it's really about an effort that supports the whole ecosystem. We also work with publishers. We launched a program called Player for Publishers, which has now 50 European news providers in it, where we provide them with technical support to have a video player embedded in their own website, which reduces complexity and cost for them. And then we also work with them to optimize the content they produce for YouTube. Their watch time has doubled, and they really appreciate that fact that their watch time has really increased through our investment in them. So watch time can be an important metric.
So you do accept then that there is a problem of bogus news, misleading news, disinformation, and you also accept that you have both the responsibility to and the means to address that?
We recognize that there is a problem of misinformation, and we are dedicated to making sure that we are promoting authoritative content when it comes to news and demoting misinformation and low quality content.
Do you have a sense of moral responsibility to take those actions?
We have both a sense of social responsibility and it's a business priority for us. Again, the trust that users have in our services is reliant on us providing a high quality experience when they come to the site. Presumably when people come looking for news rather than entertainment, what they expect to find is factual reporting from a variety of sources. We do provide information from diverse news sources from around the world. We think that's valuable. And so our investment in this area is yes, because we recognize that it's an important policy matter, but also because it's an important business priority.
Paul Lewis confirmed the Shazlow conclusions in relation to the United States presidential election, which suggested that YouTube was 6 times more likely to recommend videos that aided the Trump campaign than the Clinton campaign. Do you accept those figures?
So again, I'm not here to comment on the particular methodology, but I will say
go on, comment on it.
Well, we did publicly say that we didn't agree with the methodology that was used. We weren't provided the 8,000 videos to examine them, but this is an employee that left the company.
But you've got a bigger selection because you've got the whole set. So maybe you could run their methodology past your set, which is bigger, and get what you might consider to be a more accurate solution. How about doing that?
So let me explain how I think the recommendation engine did function in the lead up to the election, which is it's a reflection of user interest. So to the extent that there was more content recommended about one candidate versus the other, that was because there was a lot more user interest being expressed in that candidate. So we saw more searches for that candidate. I think we saw similar trends across broadcast coverage of the U.S. election where one candidate got more coverage than the other. So that's a reflection of what users wanted to see, what they were interested in, what they were looking for when they came to the site.
But Ms. Stevens has already identified the possibility that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because your recommendations and up next simply reinforce what's gone before, and it tends to spiral in one particular direction as opposed to providing balance.
So this is an important question for us to figure out how to ensure that we're providing information that users actually want to watch and will watch, that is also diverse. We do not build any political bias into our algorithms. We design products for everyone. We invest heavily in ensuring that there is no bias built into the algorithms that we design. There is a human element here too, though, which is people want to watch what they want to watch. So it's hard if someone isn't expressing an interest in a particular person or type of content to just insert something that's opposite to that and expect them to watch it. We see abandonment of the service when we do that because humans have their own will. So we try to create a diversity of content, but at the same time keep it topical enough that the user feels we're fulfilling the interest they've expressed to us when they come to the service.
Okay, and finally, can I just ask, if a video is getting hundreds of thousands or even millions of hits, and then all of a sudden gets taken down, even when it's at the top of its performance. Would that not be a little bit strange in reference to your business model?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Well, if a video is getting hundreds of thousands or millions of hits, which is good for you and good for the person who posted the video, and then they take it down when it's at the top of the game, would that not strike you as a little bit odd?
So the community guidelines and content policies we have for YouTube apply to all of our creators equally, no matter how popular they are. So we identify content when it's flagged by users or detected by our own internal systems. We evaluate those videos, and if they violate our policies, we remove them immediately. It doesn't matter who the creator is or how many views the video has.
And what if the creator themselves takes it down?
The creators on YouTube always have control over their own content and are free to delete it at any time.
Thank you. Julian Knight.
Thank you, Chair. You talked about how much progress you've made, and you believe that your moves in this particular area are quite effective. Yet we've just discovered that potentially you're spending 0.1% of your turnover. And more recently, in fact this morning, we have the front page of the Wall Street Journal that states that they've done an investigation, a very forensic one by a journalist called Jack Nicker's old-style journalism, if you like. He says the recommendations that you present are often divisive, misleading or false content, despite changes the site has recently made to highlight more neutral fare, and that potentially up to 70% of viewing time is taking up with these recommendations. So in the light of that, why has your self-regulation so demonstrably failed, and how many chances do you need?
So again, our recommendation engine was designed with the main use case of YouTube in mind, the things that people come to YouTube and love the site for. Comedy, music, cooking vlogs, beauty vlogs, and it works quite well for those use cases. We recognize that for news, the effort that we've put in to promote more authoritative sources and demote lower quality content is a work in progress, and we will continue to invest in getting it better. But
you stand by the fact that it's quite effective, because that's what you said at the start.
Quite effective for the majority use case of YouTube. News is less than 2% of our watch time, and so it's actually not the majority use case of the platform.
So you're good on the 98%, but that 2% you think your algorithms don't work for at the moment?
I think they're working better than they were 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and so on. This is an area where we're continually investing to make sure that we're providing the right news experience for users when they come to YouTube. We're committed to doing better. When we see some of the results in that Wall Street Journal article, frankly, we're not proud of them. That is not the experience that we want to provide to our users.
So you agree with the methodology of this article, you take that on board, you dispute the Guardian's one potentially from back in the past, but you say that is basically, that's an, we have a phrase in Britain which is a fair cop, effectively. Is this a fair cop?
I think that the results that are pictured in that article were taken from YouTube, and so to the extent that we look at those and think we could do better, we certainly look at those and think we can do better.
Okay, one area in which you seem to do quite remarkably better is over things like sporting rights. Now, for example, if I wish to post a final touchdown in the Super Bowl, as I'm saying that as in America, but I'd probably think about a Premier League soccer goal, that would be taken down just within minutes. It would always be, it would be almost instantaneous. You'd be right onto that. Why does it take so much longer, and at all, when it comes to misinformation by foreign powers that are specifically looking to undermine the West?
So when it comes to copyrighted material, we have invested a lot over the years to make sure that we're protecting people's intellectual property rights. And part of why the detection and removal is so much faster is that rights holders provide us with a digital file of their copyrighted material. So we have that as the starting place. We already know what content the systems are looking for, and so we can identify matches to that content relatively quickly using our technology. If we were provided a digital file of every misinformation video, we would be able to identify it just as quickly. But unfortunately, our systems have to look for patterns. They're quite sophisticated at doing that, but bad actors are also constantly evolving and trying to evade detection. So it is a little bit of a cat and mouse game that obviously we're always trying to stay one step ahead of those who attempt to misuse our services.
So it's not just about the money, and it's not just about the fear of being sued that you act so quickly when it's to copyright. But however, when it comes to this misinformation, as I say, by foreign actors, the evidence is abundant and out there. This is effectively not in the same ballpark. Just to stretch the sporting analogy.
It is a top priority for us. As I said, the security...
0.1%.
I'm not sure that the financials behind this are the right metric, in that the technology that we deploy, which is a hard thing to monetize, actually does a lot of the work at scale to identify this content with speed. So if you try to kind of quantify in people hours how many hours of human endeavor are being saved by the technology, I think we'd get to a much vaster number. So we really, in order to address these issues at scale, need to invest in the technology that can find the content and enable us to act on it quickly.
Okay. Germany is effectively, I'm going to turn to you with one question in a moment, Mr. Gingras. I'm sorry to leave out. Germany is effectively sort of regulated just ahead of their elections in terms of removing hate speech and social media. I think they were particularly concerned about the reaction to immigration. And social media has responded, and many commentators suggested there was a demonstrable reduction in the level and effectiveness of interference in their and also the French elections. Surely this is strong evidence that the way in which Western democracies protect themselves is to regulate you.
So we work with elections and campaigns around the world to help them with digital tools to protect their websites and campaigns from any interference, from phishing attempts and so on. We're very committed to investing in the integrity of elections and in providing security support to political candidates and campaigns. That's a service that we can help provide. We collaborate with others on that. I think in terms of the German law that was recently passed, there has been robust public debate about the risks and benefits of that approach. And I think since it's been implemented in January, a lot of public criticism of the way that it has played out. So I think the debate is ongoing on whether that's the right approach.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gingras, your company was very kindly hosted us in New York in order to talk about the Trust Program, which was very interesting. We also received, when we were in New York, so it was quite stark evidence over the crushing impact of on local press and increasing the national press of the sucking out of advertising revenue by companies such as yourselves from more traditional media. What happens, do you think, when you talk about how you want to basically train up journalists and get them able in order basically to use your platforms more effectively? But what happens when all we have are a few sort of global players, the likes of the New York Times, Washington Post, and outside Atlantic, the British Broadcasting Corporation? It's pointless having a journalistic program if there's so few of them left. What else are you going to do in order to ensure that proper journalism survives?
Thank you, sir. That's a very important question, and one which we are deeply concerned about as well. I should point out that the success of our efforts with Google Search and our ads business is really dependent on there being a rich ecosystem of knowledge out there, including at the local level. As we often say, our success is dependent on the success of publishers. I will point out that clearly the publishing business at every dimension has certainly been changed and affected by the introduction of the Internet. Without question. I will also point out, however, the various things that we're doing to assist in this. First of all, I should point out that we share 70+% of our display ad revenue with publishers around the world to the tune of some $12.5 billion. So that is one element, as well as providing them with ad systems and tools that allow them to derive revenue. 2 million publishers around the world benefit from that. We also drive traffic to many news sites in the tune of well beyond 10 billion visits per month, which has been valued by third parties at between 5 and 7p per visit. That is another $5 to $7 billion a year in revenue to the industry. So that's one component, but it's just one. I think we need to recognize again that the ecosystem has changed. And one way to think about this is think about it through our own actions. I started out in the newspaper business. I started out in the press rooms of the Providence Journal when I was a teenager. I know when I was young...
Does the Providence Journal still exist?
Yes, it does still exist.
Yeah. There aren't that many local newspapers in the US that do particularly exist. I'm very happy about what it's very good that you're giving this background, but basically the point is, effectively, what actually happens when the journalistic landscape is so decimated, and that basically people don't know what to trust in this respect. Is there is there a sense of responsibility that you have in order to ensure that we have that trusted news?
We do feel a strong sense of responsibility for the reasons I pointed out. It's important to society and it's important to the nature of our business. And so we've mounted many, many efforts. My role at Google is both on the one side to oversee our efforts to surface news on Google Search and on Google News, but another part of my role is the various efforts we have mounted to help enable the publishing systems and legacy publishers to make the transition from the old marketplace of information before the internet to today's. But behaviors have changed. When you think about it, when I was young and I was looking for a used car, I went to the classifieds in my local newspaper. If you're doing that in Birmingham today, you'd go to Gumtree, not to your local newspaper. If I was looking for a house or a rental apartment as a kid, I would go to a newspaper. Today in Liverpool, you'll go to Zillow. Even when it comes to national news, I went to local newspapers for my national news. Now, much of it might have been from wire services, but I went to them. But today also, people's behaviors have changed. They go to the Telegraph or the London Times. So the marketplace has changed. What that means is that it's in what we feel as part of our responsibility is how do we help news organizations, enable news organizations to help figure out what kind of products can they serve to their local communities. And we do this in various ways. One is through deep collaboration with the publishing industry, right? It's important that we understand their challenges and that they understand what we can do. We've mounted efforts like the subscription project. Can we bring better tools to help drive subscription revenue? Can we bring better data and knowledge to help them identify targets of opportunity in their markets? We helped with tools for digital storytelling and trainings for journalists through the Google News Lab. We've trained thousands of journalists in the UK and will continue to do more. We've provided innovation funding in Europe through the Digital News Initiative, some $83 million to date, and £6 million, I should say, and £6 million in the UK, helping folks like Trinity Mirror develop new services like In Your Area. So there's a lot of opportunity here to continue to develop, and we're seeing good signs of success around the world, but there's no question there's more work to be done, more innovation that needs to take place to reach that sustainable ecosystem of local news publishers as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of follow-up questions, one from Mr Matheson and the other from Mr Knight. Following on from Mr Matheson, your business relies on people being on your site and viewing for as long as possible, hence you have these sophisticated recommendation engines. And they're designed to do that. So how do those recommendation engines differentiate between children and adults? And is it the goal to get the user, regardless of age, to stay on the site and consuming content for as long as possible?
So when it comes to Google, we only allow users that are 13 and older. That is the limitation on the site. And I think your question gets to this issue of public concern around tech addiction and particularly young people's use of smartphones and social media. And when I think about the goal of Google services, it's really to provide products that enhance people's lives, not detract from them. And we think that this question of how we can fulfill that goal better is a really important question to society. So we are investing in research to better understand these issues, to better understand what kinds of product design we can implement to make sure that we're providing a product that is an enhancement to people's lives, that enhances people's productivity. If you look at YouTube, we have 1 billion views of educational content every day. This is a tremendous asset to society. If you think about something like Khan Academy, where an uncle started making videos.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do need to direct you back to the questions and not to make general statements about YouTube.
Thank you, Chair. No, the question is, how do you differentiate between adult consumption and child consumption?
We don't look at adult consumption versus child consumption. The recommendations are based on the video that is being watched and content that is associated with that video or with the watch history of the individual signed-in user. Again, only people 13 and older can be signed in to YouTube, so the watch history there would be teenagers and above.
Okay, so there is no mechanism other than an arbitrary, you have to be 13 to view, that allows you to say who's watching what, and anyone of any age, if they any tech savvy 5, 6-year-old could probably get round the 13-year-old barrier. So any tech-savvy child could consume as much content as they like, and you wouldn't know.
So protecting teen users on YouTube is a top priority for us, and one of the things we do is we age gate videos that are more mature, and then you have to be signed in and over 18 to view them. So that is the one place where more mature videos aren't eligible to be viewed.
I'm not talking about
recommended.
The more mature video. I'm talking about the consumption, the unrestricted consumption of YouTube videos by children. And I'm just trying to see, is there a way that you have managed to address? I suspect by your answer, the answer is you haven't managed to address it.
So the investment we've made is in developing a dedicated YouTube experience for families and children, which is a dedicated app called YouTube Kids. And when we designed this product, the goal was to create a new service that gives parents control and information, and that it was informed by collaboration with child safety experts. So we designed a product that is a much more limited corpus of YouTube videos of family-friendly content. We give parents controls such as a timer for how long their child can view the app, the ability to turn search off so that the child is limited to a much smaller set of videos, and other controls. And this was because we want to provide a good experience for families, but we recognize it really needed to be in its own space.
Are you happy that you are doing everything you possibly can? I suppose it goes back to the trust issue that you talked about, Mr. Gingras. Are you happy that you are doing everything that you can to protect children from this unlimited consumption that we hear so much about, and that's why people have issues around child interaction with the internet at the moment?
I would point out that we're never fully satisfied with our work. As I mentioned, this is a vibrant, live, changing ecosystem every day. For instance, with Google Search, we get billions of queries every day. 15% of those queries are queries we've never seen before. Right? So it's an ongoing effort. As I often mention, our algorithms aren't perfect. I doubt they ever will be, which means we have to be ever vigilant. And I'll note earlier when one was talking about how many dollars we've invested in this, I don't want you to reach the assessment that when we mention $10 million of additional investment, for instance, in security efforts and so on, that's just additional recent investment. This is building on a foundation of effort where we've got thousands of engineers at YouTube, thousands of engineers at Google Search, security systems, security people that we're building upon and will continue to build upon such that we can understand the new challenges and address them as quickly as we can. Okay. There are no laurels that we rest on here. I just want to be clear.
Okay. My final question, and it relates to what Mr. Knight was saying. This fairy tale idea of a fun space where everyone could share and enjoy, it really has been superseded by events, and it's no longer possible to have YouTube operate in the way that it did way back at the beginning because of people who are exploiting it and social issues that have arisen. Are you satisfied that the current legislative framework is sufficiently robust to meet these new challenges, or would you welcome further legislation, or as the debate is now happening, how would you like to participate in that debate to shape a legislative framework that works for everybody?
We are intrinsically motivated to address these issues. Again, it's the top priority for YouTube as a company, and we welcome any conversation about legislative proposals. We are a big part of my organization's role is interacting with policymakers and other stakeholders to hear ideas, to participate in conversation about them. So we're always happy to do that. But I want to reiterate that we don't need extra motivation to get this right. It is mission critical for the business for us to address these issues responsibly, and that's what we're committed to doing.
But more collaboration, more engagement these are problems that we're facing as a society, right, that we're all facing. There are no silver bullets to any of these questions. They're big questions, whether we're talking about the challenges of misinformation or the challenges of the evolution of the publishing ecosystem. And if there's anything that we've learned over the last several years, it didn't start in the last 18 months, was that our best approach to these is to engage with the community, whether they be publishers, whether they be people in the public policy space, so that we can all collectively gain a better understanding of how to approach the problems and what they are, and how do we partner together on finding better solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Well, I think we take your point, but we've heard the expression top priority a lot. I think if we judge the company based on what it does rather than what it says, the top priority is maximising advertising revenue from the platform. And a very small proportion of that is reinvested back into dealing with some of this more harmful content. I think that is why, it's one of the reasons why we're here, and I think one of the reasons the social concern about this is growing. But Giles, did you want to come?
Yeah, yes. Thank you. To use pretty much every analogy under the sun, I mean, it seems to me like you've opened a Pandora's box, probably unintentionally, and you've got a tiger by the tail. And you're now, to carry on with the sporting analogy, somewhat behind the curve. It seems extraordinary that when you're talking about misinformation, well, let's face it, misinformation, disinformation, fake news can be sort of sexy. I mean, people like ghosts, they like conspiracy theories, they like UFO stories, and they follow it. And this creates, I would imagine, a huge amount of traffic, both propagating those theories, etc., and those who want to quash that. So that would be good for you, because you can then harvest the data from those people who are doing that. And then that has a commercial and potentially political value, would it not?
So let me talk a little bit about the spectrum of fake news, because I think the term is used to reference a lot of different categories of content, and then I can speak to how we deal with it and address your question. So on one end of the spectrum, you have fake news farms, content that's produced in bulk. There's a financial incentive to try to distribute as virally as possible. This pattern is caught by our spam detection systems. It violates our policies. We remove it. Then you have what I think you may be referring to, which is kind of clickbait, content that might be more sensationalistic. We see videos with titles in all caps or salacious thumbnails. We see this clickbait content. What we do there is we demote it. Our algorithms are trained to identify clickbait and demote it. And it's curious that you asked the question about watch time and user interest, because what we expected when we started demoting clickbait content is that it would create a decline in watch time. And that was the initial result. We were willing to absorb that because we didn't think that it was high quality content. So we were willing to absorb the loss of watch time. But, and this may make you feel better about humanity, over time, the watch time actually picked back up and increased. So when we were surfacing the higher quality content, people actually started consuming that as well. Then I think if you think further down the spectrum of what people call fake news, you also have somewhere in the middle various opinions that people express on YouTube about current events, political matters, and so on. We don't consider that content to be news. It's subject to our content policies. If it crosses the line to hate speech or harassment, obviously we're going to take it down, but that isn't news content in our view.
But you did say that just a little while ago that people watch what they want to watch, and you're sort of on the back of that, and you're not able to sort of keep up with it. I mean, I put it to you that it's actually not in large corporations' interest like yours to put a stop to this, because you are harvesting data.
So this is really about the kind of site and service we want to provide to our users and the long-term play. It's not necessarily about short-term results. So when it comes to news content, our commitment is to provide our users with authoritative information from established news sources. We want to demote that lower quality content, not necessarily because we think that we'll get more watch time. It may be true, your assumption there may be accurate, that that more clickbaity content people will watch because it's entertaining or for whatever reason. That is not enough for us to prioritize it. Our goal is to demote it and to promote the more authoritative sources, because we think it's a better long-term play for the business to be seen as a trusted provider of news and information to our users.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just final couple of questions from me before we close this panel. I noticed that YouTube's policy now is to create a label or a tag on content from broadcasters who are publicly funded in their countries. That's correct, isn't it? I think in response to requirements in the United States that be done. Is that correct?
So we recently started rolling out a new transparency feature for certain news sources. So we made a public commitment to provide users with information about the sources of news they consume. And we've started fulfilling that commitment by introducing a new label that both informs users if a news outlet receives government funding, and then a separate label to inform users if a news outlet is a public broadcaster. It's just started rolling out, but we plan to extend that and think that providing transparency to users is an important part of what we can provide as a service.
There's been some criticism of this because this means that RT, a Kremlin-backed propaganda station, is in the same bucket as the BBC, a publicly funded, editorially independent public broadcaster. By mixing up RT and the BBC together, do you think that is making things easier for consumers to navigate or muddying the waters?
So as we developed this new feature, we did reach out to various news outlets, including the BBC, and we got this feedback directly from them, which is why we created two separate labels, one that states that an entity receives government funding in full or part. That's what applies to RT, and then a separate label that labels things as a public broadcaster, which is what applies to the BBC. So they're actually two distinct labels, and each label links to an online source where users can read more about the news source and get additional information about who funds them and what their structure is.
I mean, I think that there is a degree of confusion here, and I think some people reading that might say, well, what's all the fuss about RT? They're a public broadcaster. They're state-backed. So is the BBC. It's all the same thing. Where actually they're radically different things, and it's not just about the ownership structure or model of the organisation, but the way it's run and the degree of editorial independence it has, which exists at the BBC and doesn't exist at RT. So I think certainly from the evidence we've received from people whilst we're in America this week I think it's very strongly suggested this is something that needs to be thought through again, because this may unwittingly sow more confusion rather than adding the transparency that you've asked for.
We agree that more information and context is better, which is why the label does link to a site where people can get additional information like what you described to distinguish some of these news providers from each other.
Yeah, I'm sure that's all well and good, but I mean, I think the way people consume content, and I guess we heard earlier on, the kind of with Next Up providing a constant stream of content that people are seeing, then I'm not sure that's a service that people in reality will use that much of. What they'll go on is the labels, and if labels seem to be sort of categorising content in a similar way, they may trust them in a similar way, and that may not be helpful to them in terms of making sure they're consuming the highest quality news. But I think we've completed our questions for this session. Richard Greengrass, Juniper Downs, thank you very much for your evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.